thank you all so much for attending and joining us today. This is one of those moments in American history where everything feels like it's on fire. Human rights are being threatened, not just locally in our state, but nationally as well. And so your advocacy is very important during this time. And we hope that you come away from today with a little bit more knowledge of some of the landscape going on in North Dakota at the legislative session, as well as a bunch of tools that can help you get organized, get connected, and be able to move forward on justice and human rights. So without further ado, if you don't know me, my name is Dalton Erickson. I go by he, they pronouns, and I'm the executive director for the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition. Today, you'll be hearing from myself, Shay Todd, who is our Project Queer LGBTQ organizer working with Forward 701, and Christina Sambor, who is our contracted lobbyist working at the legislature every day to lobby our legislators to vote for human rights and make an impact. So without further ado, if you are not familiar, the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition did recently update our website, brand new redesign. And I just wanted to shout out that there are a number of resources on here, and you can also sign up for our email list to get some newsletters. You can contact me if you ever want to arrange to have a one-on-one and discuss how you can further get involved, or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me through either this contact us form or by emailing me at dalton@ndhrc.org. And up in the Stay Informed tab, you will find those resources as well as links to all the events that we'll be discussing today. Part of our work is around educating, advocating, and organizing around human rights. And the best way that we know how to do this is by building a coalition. So we work with partners in different organizations, get people connected and into this ecosystem of advocacy and activism. As often that is such a huge first step of like even understanding the landscape. We've put together local human rights coalitions. Currently, they're happening in Grand Forks, Fargo, and Minot. So these happen every month at the same time and location. They are a great opportunity to connect in person. And if you represent an organization, this is a great opportunity to represent that org, get out the work that you're working on, and meet people that are new to activism and get them involved in your work as well. So one of the key features that we do with our human rights coalitions is that we always make sure that we walk away with an action. We don't believe in having ineffective meetings, and we want to feel like we're always making a difference. So whether that action is connecting with an organization and finding out when their meeting times are, or if it's contacting your legislators, it is one of those things that you're going to walk away and make sure that something gets done. To move mountains, we have to start with moving small rocks. And this is one of the key features that we are intending to do and keep doing, not just during the legislative session, but forever in perpetual illness, as I butcher that word. So I also want to emphasize that in today's day and age, a lot of things feel like they happen online, digital, this social connection. But now more than ever, it is important to meet your neighbors and collaborate in person. And this is the perfect venue for you to meet these people that are doing great work in our communities and find out how you can help them and also make your own difference. In the chat, we are sharing a list of those events. While we cover the Grand Forks, Fargo, and Minot areas with ours, Stutsman County, which is where Jamestown is located, has their own human rights coalition that formed on their own. So you'll also see a link to that as well. I don't know when their next meeting is, but previously they just had one where they talked just a broad overview of what human rights are. So if you're in the Jamestown area, check out the Stutsman County Human Rights Coalition as well. Follow them on Facebook, as well as the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition, so we can keep you up to date. But this advocacy document has a bunch of the tools that you'll need. So up at the top, you'll see some links that will direct you to how to find your legislators, who represents you at the state capitol, some resources on how to submit bill testimony, as well as just basic 101s for what advocacy is and how the government works. On this link, you'll also find the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition's legislative list, which is a number of our bills that are our top priorities, especially including LGBTQ legislation. I've also linked to the North Dakota League of Women and Voters legislative update that they just provided yesterday, which is just a YouTube video similar to ours, but focusing more on their priorities. Additionally, the North Dakota United, which is our public union, has a legislator report card. So if you want to see how your legislators are voting when it comes to issues such as public schools and how the union recognizes their good grades versus bad grades, check out their report card, look at how your legislators have been voting and whether or not they passed their grades, and they have a report card that their parents would be proud of. And then finally, Faye is always the ever so holy LGBTQ organizer and has a wonderful resource for legislative actions that you can take part in when it comes to LGBTQ rights. Faye also recently updated and put together just a peer guide for HB 1144, which we'll be diving into later. And then additionally, below are a bunch of other links to various resources, our events page, the Forward 701 page that you'll be hearing about from Shay, the North Dakota Coalition for Homeless People's Housing Resources. If you're interested in spreading resources for those that are unhoused, that is a great resource and covers the entire state. I also have a link to Prairie Action, who puts out a daily newsletter of all the news that's relevant to you throughout the state, as well as a link to their Megaphone project. For those of you that want to be more digital activists and get engaged in the digital realm, is a fantastic program that I shout out. And then finally, a lot of people have been worried about some of the immigration things going on, know your rights, and how they can be engaged with the current turmoil happening in the immigration world. And I strongly suggest people watch the Moorhead Human Rights Commission putting together their meeting. The first speaker is Anna Marie Stenson, who is an immigration lawyer based out of Fargo. And so she covers everything from the legal aspect, and she is one of 3 immigration lawyers in the state. So her work is very important, and it's good to take this sort of advice from a lawyer, as these sorts of things are complex, given the nature of immigration. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Shay to discuss Forward 701.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jocelyn. This is our Forward 701 kind of front page, which I'll dive into here in a moment. I'll introduce myself. I am Shay. I am the NDHRC LGBTQ plus intern, and I have been focusing on our Project Queer organization project, which I will speak about here in a minute. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Forward 701 is a website and a network created by and for the LGBTQ plus North Dakota. We're here, we're queer, this is our home. The website itself shares information, resources, including local pride organizations, community resources, things like local board openings. So say you're in Bismarck, there might be an opening that you can check out if you are interested in joining a board there, as well as legislative updates and ways to take action, which I will talk about here in a second as well. Next, please. How to get involved. So you can see what your local organization is doing in your community, like I just mentioned. You can reach out to me to get involved with our Pride statewide meetings. My email is there, as well as the Forward 701 email. Forward 701 email is on the website itself. And then are also welcome to send a Facebook message to Forward 701. I'm pretty active on there, so I will see it. Next slide, please. Pride statewide meetings. So I just mentioned that. The purpose of those meetings is to improve communication, connect, and collaborate between these LGBTQ groups throughout our state. Our next one is actually March 20th. It is 6 to 7 p.m. I will actually put this little interest form down in the chat here in a second. It'll just collect your information, allow me to have everything in one spot, just for ease. During these Pride statewide meetings, we want to talk about how we can improve and collaborate together. and work on advocacy events as well. All right, next slide, please. Last but not least, our upcoming lobby dates. So we are looking at March 10th, 11th, and 12th, or 12th, excuse me. We're kind of waiting on the official calendar to release from the legislator. The lobby date would focus on the HB 1144, which is the anti-trans bathroom bill for schools. Keep an eye out. We will be updating the Forward 701 website as we get more information, as well as the Facebook page that's to share that information out so you can get involved. And you can also feel free to contact me as well if you don't see anything and you're kind of waiting to hear more. But yeah, wonderful. There's some good ways to get involved in your LGBTQ plus community.
And I'm going to pass it on to Christina to give some more legislative updates now.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Christina Sandborg. Everybody hear me okay? Any thumbs up? Okay, great. I apologize if I've got any kids or dogs in the background here. So, we might have some unannounced guests, but my name is Christina. I am an attorney. I live in Bismarck. I have been working at the legislature as a legislative advocate or lobbyist since 2015. So 10 years now. So this is my 6th legislative session. When I started lobbying at the legislature, I was working on issues that affected primarily unhoused youth, trafficked youth, unhoused populations generally, and domestic violence. Over time, have begun to work additionally on other human rights issues, specifically reproductive rights and LGBTQ plus rights. And so for this session, the last session, I've been contracted with the Human Rights Coalition to provide lobbying support during the session. Also, Dalton and I work together quite a bit just in kind of collaborating on advocacy and strategy and thinking through all the different ways that we can try to get some wins in North Dakota on occasion and make this a better place for everybody that lives here. And so I think, Shay, did we share the Google Doc link to the general, to the overview page?
Yeah. So on the legislative list, advocacy resources and legislative updates page, there is a link there for the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition legislative. So if people want to pull that up as well so they can follow along, feel free to.
So I just want to draw everybody's attention to that. So let me just quickly, I just put in a request to share my screen.
All right.
Okay, so on this sheet that we that is linked there in the chat, if you look down under legislative tracking, that first NDHRC list, you can click into that. That will take you to the document that we've created that sort of has a summary of all of the different pieces of legislation we're tracking, along with the status of each piece of legislation. So what I'm going to do is allow you all to pull that up on your end so you can kind of see the overall overview list. You can see there's lots of things there, and we're not going to be able to get into all of them, but I wanted to make sure everybody clicks into that, knows what it is, and can access it. On the left side of the document, where is it? Oh boy, hold on. Sorry. Give me 1 second here. I just my cursor just jumped off of where I wanted it to be. So give me just a second here to get back to where I want to be.
And on this legislative list, I will also shout out that it is hyperlinked. So when you see the like
Yep.
bill number, you can click onto that and go onto the North Dakota legislative website itself, and it should directly link so you can see where it's currently at with everything. So that just a useful tool for you in case of having to hold on to a million links. So
Yep. So, so with everyone able to pull that up, what I'm going to show you here today is, and can everybody see the actual bill document here? So I wanted to just sort of walk through the language in a handful of bills that we will be focusing on that have made it through their first house. So, just as a general sort of overview and review of how bills make it through the legislature. We have both a House and a Senate, right? And so they're independent sort of bodies of voting blocks. And so your representatives serve in the House of Representatives, your senators serve in the Senate. And each bill, so when the legislative session starts, both representatives and senators can submit legislation. And so legislation is what you see here, which would be actually like a proposed law with a number attached. The House bills are start with 1 and the Senate bills start with 2. So depending on whether a member of the House of Representatives introduces something or whether a senator introduces something, that's you'll know which one it is by what the first number in the bill is. So if it's a 1, it's the House. If it's a 2, it's the Senate. And so when the legislative session starts every other year, every single one of the unique features of the North Dakota legislature, which other people in other states find absolutely bonkers, is that every single bill that gets filed gets both a committee hearing and a floor vote. So, for example, at the national level, when legislation gets filed or submitted, it first goes to what's called a committee hearing. And so that's a smaller group of representatives that have a specialized focus in one area or another. So that's true for the North Dakota legislature. That's true for Congress at the federal level. At Congress at the federal level, those committee chairs have the ability to sort of like never schedule something for a hearing, or there's all sorts of maneuvers. I'm not going to get into all the details, but there's all sorts of maneuvers at the federal level that can cause something that is submitted to really never see the light of day, so to speak. In North Dakota, that's different. Everything that gets filed gets both a committee hearing and what's called a floor vote. So let's take this House Bill 1144, for example. So that got filed at the beginning of session. So senators and representatives have a certain window of time up until a couple weeks into January, usually when the session has started, to submit their bills. And then there's like a cutoff date. So you can't just continue to introduce legislation over the course of session. You have a certain window at the beginning in which you can submit legislation. So everything that's filed before that time gets assigned to a committee. That committee has an initial hearing on the bill. So at those committee hearings, it's a smaller group of representatives, and that is the opportunity for public comment, if you will, on the proposed legislation. So that's when there's a publicly announced hearing. You can show up, you can provide testimony. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the legislature will allow people, most committees, not all committees, most committees will allow you to join via Zoom and submit testimony via Zoom. There's a handful of committees, of committee chairs that have decided this session not to allow electronic testimony, but yeah, so that committee hearing happens, and that's kind of where there's some more discussion, right? And then at some point after that initial committee hearing, there is what's called committee work, and that's when the committee will discuss the contents of the bill, any proposed amendments, and then they will take a vote. So if there are amendments, the bill is changed, right, to amend whatever is changed in it. The committee votes on that, and what they do is they give a do pass or do not pass recommendation. So the committee vote essentially results in here's a smaller group of people that have taken a look at this piece of legislation in more detail. Here's our recommendation for how the entire body, so whether that's the House or the Senate, here's our recommendation for the entire body of how you should vote on this bill. And it gets scheduled then before the entire House or the entire Senate, depending on which side it's on. And then they vote. And that's actually the vote that results in whether the law passes or fails. So the point in legislative session where we're at right now is what's called crossover. So I mentioned this whole process, right, that starts either in the House or the Senate, depending on who introduces something. After crossover, everything goes like this. Whoop. So everything that the House voted on that passed goes over to the Senate. Everything that the Senate voted on or passed goes over to the House. So what that means for legislation, and what you'll see on the list that that I hope everybody clicked into, is that when you look through that list and the status of it, there's lots of legislation that failed in the initial House that heard it, right? Those bills then do not pass over to the other House. So they have to clear each House, but they don't like get a second chance to see if they pass the other one. So if it's initiated on the Senate, it doesn't pass the Senate, then it's dead. If it's initiated in the Senate, passes the Senate, but goes to the House and the House kills it, it doesn't become law, right? So that's kind of where we're at in the session, is that all of the bills have made their way all the way through both the House and the Senate in their House of origin. And now the ones that have passed that floor vote, that final vote, are crossing over to the other side. So the bills that I'm going to review with you now are ones that have passed and that are priorities for us going forward into the second half of the legislative session. And the first one you'll see before you is engrossed House Bill 1144. That word engrossed there basically means it's been amended. So the bill as it stands now is in a different form than its original form when it was filed because of that committee hearing process that I mentioned. So this bill came up, there was initial language in it, the committee discussed it, made amendments, approved those amendments, and then those amendments were adopted into the language. So when the whole House of Representatives voted on this bill, this was the version, the amended version that they voted on. And so this is the bill that we discussed, was sort of another attempt at legislating rules around accommodations within public schools for transgender students. And so when you look at this bill, you'll see that there's portions of this that are underlined. So for example, can you see me highlighting that there? So the portions of it that are underlined are amendments. Okay, so we talked about amendments to a piece of legislation. Now this is showing you where the parts that aren't amended are parts of existing law. So this code section passed in a previous legislative session, this 15.106-21, okay? What this now proposed law 1144 seeks to do is add the underlined portions to existing law. So, so if that makes sense, right? The bill itself that proposes new language can be amended, but then the effect of the bill can be to amend existing law. So those are two different things. So these are the amendments to the existing law, meaning everything that's in here that isn't underlined has already been passed, isn't really up for discussion unless it's the underlined portions, because those are the proposed changes to existing law. And so you can see here too, there's a strike through area right here. And what that means is that those are words that are in the existing law that this change to the law would propose to strike. So as we look at this, we go to subsection 1 here. Existing law had said that a school board, a public school, or a public school teacher may not adopt a policy that requires or prohibits any individual from using a student's preferred gender pronoun. Okay, that's what it reads right now. The amendment would propose that that basically it would kind of modify this requires or prohibits to say they may not adopt a policy guidelines, whether implicit or explicit, requiring or prohibiting an individual. So what the effect of this particular change is that they are broadening the sort of way in which public schools can address the use of someone's preferred pronouns by saying, you know, we previously passed a law that said public schools may not adopt a policy that either requires or prohibits usage of pronouns. Now they're saying, we don't think that's sufficient enough, so we want to prohibit a policy, any guidelines, whether implicit or explicit, requiring or prohibiting a pronoun. And the implicit or explicit is, I think, more troubling because an implicit right means that it isn't necessarily formally written down anywhere, but there's maybe a way that teachers or a particular school district would agree to address the usage of preferred pronouns. So they're trying to further restrict teachers, administrators, et cetera, in the public schools from being able to sort of have an unwritten policy, so to speak, of how they're going to address pronoun use. So that's the first aspect of the amendment, is that they're trying to be more restrictive in allowing teachers and administrators to use preferred pronouns. The second portion of this bill, which again, and Dalton, can you nod? Is my highlighting showing up when I'm doing that? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So number 4 there is kind of the new content, if you will, here, which is really goofy, to use a technical term. So this is so first of all, in kind of plain language, this language here is attempting to limit school districts' abilities to design bathrooms in a particular way. If any of you have ever been in a bathroom in like a public venue where there are what we call closet style bathrooms, which means you go into a bathroom stall and the door closes and it's kind of a completely private space. And then when you come out, there's public sinks. There is a sort of trend in architecture, and some in certain school districts in North Dakota have this design where basically it's a gender neutral bathroom because each individual toilet is within sort of a closet style closure, right? So once you're in to use the facilities, so to speak, you are in a private room. When you come out of that private room, alarm bells ring. There may be people of all sorts of genders out at the sink washing their hands by you. This is the concern that the legislature has at this point. So the language here says that a restroom or shower on school grounds, which is accessible by multiple individuals at one time, must be designated for use exclusively for males or exclusively for females and may be only used by members of the designated sex. Multi-stall or multi-room gender neutral bathrooms and shower rooms are prohibited. A restroom for males and a restroom for females may not be located together with a communal sink or communal area where students enter and exit an individual stall or room. So just to drag you through painfully through the actual language, they're actually addressing communal sinks here and saying you cannot have a communal sink in a bathroom. So that's what they're proposing. And what we're doing about it is, one of the ways that we look at and think about how to defeat some of these things is, of course, we're going to address and highlight the fact that these policies are motivated by a fear of and an animus towards transgender students and trans identities generally. In addition, these laws get very silly and specific and then bring other people in because they're likewise concerned. So this is a good example of, there are, I think, at least 2 different school districts in the state that already have these types of bathrooms that would have these gender neutral sinks, which I can't believe is 3 words I've ever had to utter in a line together out of my mouth. But as you can imagine, school districts have opinions about this if they are going to have to renovate their bathroom facilities because of this law. In addition, one of the big overall themes of the legislative session this year is property tax relief. While property tax funding is tied very closely to school district funding. And so when you're looking at these broader policy priorities of lowering people's property taxes, but then you're also passing laws that place really unnecessary and onerous additional potential spending requirements on school districts. Now you've got different advocacy groups that advocate on behalf of, school board administrators, school districts, things like that, worried about this law. So we're always working to look at where we can build bridges with other groups that are similarly affected, maybe for different reasons or different ways by these pieces of legislation. And as I'm sure all of you on this call know, our legislature is about 85% Republican in both houses, where there's a significant supermajority in both houses. So when we get into some of the issues that we care about, we know that there are large chunks of the representatives and the senators in our legislature that will not be persuaded to not discriminate against trans people, because that is what, for various reasons, they have decided is either a personal belief or necessary to represent to their constituencies. They believe that's what their constituencies want. We know actually when you poll people, it's not what constituencies want, but there's this perception, right? And it's all of these political dynamics that make things challenging sometimes. So I say all of that just to tell you that, as I've worked at the legislature over many years, as Dalton has been an advocate and worked in community organizing and been involved in public policy work and organizing work for many years, we are practical and pragmatic as well about how do we defeat these things and how do we build relationships and and aligned interests with other groups that may not like this bill for a different reason, but are equally committed to defeating it. So that's just an example of kind of the way that we work sometimes to manage these things. If you want to, so then moving beyond that, and we'll have a Q&A, and I won't go in this granular of detail with everything. I'm going to do this level of detail with like 2 more bills, which are not as complicated as this one is. Then just go over some of the kind of status updates for you all, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you have questions about a particular piece of legislation, I'd suggest either put them in the chat or write them down. And when we get to Q&A, I'm happy to engage with those. So when you go on to the next page here, subsection 5, you can see again those that same language from that subsection 1, which is again to try to broaden the type of speech or the type of recognition of trans identity that is allowed by a school district. So again, trying to prohibit any sort of norms or unwritten rules around someone's transgender identity. So what this piece of existing law had already said, which again passed last session, was that unless otherwise required by law, a school district may not adopt a policy concerning a student's transgender identity without their parent or legal guardian's approval, or withhold the same information. So this was, when we talked about it last session, that sort of forced outing type of law where it requires that if a student has a trans identity, that cannot be recognized by the school without parental permission. So the change to this portion of the law then says not only can they not have a written policy on this topic, but they also cannot have sort of informal norms or guidelines that are unwritten. So that's the attempt here to broaden that prohibition. And then when you look here at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, essentially this whole section, because it's underlined, would be changes to existing law, so new requirements in the law. And what this does is Representative Bill Twite, who was responsible for the gender affirming care ban and is very obsessed with these types of issues, was upset after last legislative session because of the perception that the laws that they passed didn't have quote unquote teeth. There wasn't enforcement mechanisms, there wasn't financial penalties if a school district declined to follow some of these laws that North Dakota passed. Well, the problem with that approach is that generally there's a principle of law called federalism, which means that a federal law, if the United States Congress passes a law that conflicts with a state law, the federal law is supreme. The federal law controls, okay? We've had both statutory and case law, so meaning laws that Congress pass and then the way that judges have interpreted those laws that have protected transgender people from discrimination under the category of sex-based discrimination. So there's been federal law that's been developed and interpreted that says transgender people have protections because it is sex-based discrimination to discriminate against a transgender person. So Fargo Public School District is an example of a school district that publicly declined to follow a lot of these state laws because they conflict with the federal law. So some representatives in North Dakota were upset because they felt the way they categorize it or think about it is school districts are refusing to follow the law. That is not an accurate statement of what they're doing. School districts are actually refusing to follow state law that conflicts with federal law, which has supremacy over the state law. But this portion of this, Kylie, I think you came off mute. This portion of the law tries to, in these representatives' minds, remedy the lack of compliance with state law by adding consequences, so to speak. What these consequences look like in the highlighted area is that parents may complain to the Attorney General's office that if the Attorney General's office receives a complaint, that they shall enforce the section and may conduct investigations. And then you can see that's in that subsection 7 there, and would give the Attorney General's office the authority to examine people under oath for alleged violations, to issue subpoenas, and to apply to court for an order enforcing a subpoena. So it kind of ties some legal enforcement mechanisms into a lack of compliance with this law. That if the Attorney General finds that there's been any violations, that they can apply to court for relief that would prohibit the school district from continuing the unlawful practice, that there may be a civil penalty less than $2,500 for each violation. So when you think about all the things that are prohibited here, a norm right? A sort of, here's how we're going to deal with someone's preferred pronouns. Or we've got a student who is transgender, whose parents aren't supportive, and they feel endangered if the school tells the parents that information. What this section says that the Attorney General shall investigate that, may do things like issue subpoenas, and for each violation of this law, there may be a civil penalty against the district of up to $2,500 each time. And then number 10 is what's called a legacy, or we don't really use this term. It just sort of in language evolution, we talk about it as a legacy clause, or what has been previously known as a grandfather clause. So number 10 is what's called a legacy clause that would exempt certain schools from having to modify restrooms to comply with this section. So that is a bit of an attempt to get around some of the school district concern about this bill. Okay, so if you have any questions, things you want to know more about, things you want to discuss with this, obviously there's lots to feel and think about a bill like this. Just write them down or put them in the chat, and we will get to them here shortly. So I'm going to move on to 1181. This is another bill that passed in the House, will be over at the Senate. Again, it's an engrossed bill, which means that the original language was, when I say astronomically stupid, astronomically stupid. They did amend it to be less ridiculous. But what this effectively does is in North Dakota state law, there's like definition sections. So they'll say anywhere this word is used in North Dakota law, it means this. Okay. This bill is an attempt to amend the definition of gender across the board in North Dakota state law. And you can see the underlined portions. 2 and 3 are the changes or additions to the existing law. And it essentially says that gender can only mean sex. And there's a definition of sex in another code section, right? That then says sex has to be assigned at birth, and then strictly limits the ability to change that designation at any time over the person's life. And then subsection 2 lists kind of everything that would apply to. So essentially, anywhere in all of those different categories that someone's gender is referred to, gender can only mean your sex is assigned at birth, is the effect of that. I'm going to move on. If you have questions, I would assume I can think of things I can get into now. For the sake of time, I'm not going to. If you have particular questions about this law, what I would say generally is that this law is more of a statement than really having any practical implication. So for what that's worth. 1217 is a House bill that would decriminalize the transmission of HIV. This is an important policy area. We're not going to have time to go into all of the background of this, but essentially, because of the AIDS crisis back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of reactionary right laws that were passed that would criminalize someone knowingly transmitting HIV to another person. With advancements in medical treatment, with lots of different, you know what I mean, with advancements in understanding and humanizing people who have HIV, in a lot of places, those laws have been repealed, right? And just as a general statement, medical treatment of HIV has advanced to the point that many people that have HIV, while they're not quote unquote cured, it's basically impossible for them to transmit it because modern medicine creates such a low viral load of the virus that it is impossible to transmit it. So when you have laws like this that exist that criminalize the transmission of HIV, it's very harmful to people who want to live a full life and have relationships, and right, because there's a criminal penalty potentially to having a sexual relationship with someone. So this passed after many, many years. It passed the House, so it has to go over the Senate. But I can't remember, Dalton, I don't know if you recall, I think 3 sessions maybe that Gretchen Dobrovich has been introducing this bill, and it passed this year. So that's a very exciting win for us. So that they will be supporting this bill after crossover. And then 1430 is the conversion therapy bill. So this, again, is an engrossed House bill, so meaning it was amended from its original language. This bill specifically addresses some things that happened a few years back where it was kind of a shocking and really great situation. The North Dakota Board of Social Work passed regulations that said conversion therapy is a prohibited practice in North Dakota. And just for context, if anyone's unaware, conversion therapy is a particular type of therapeutic intervention that seeks to assist someone in changing their sexual orientation from gay to straight, right? So conversion therapy can mean different things to different people. For some people, the participant may desire or believe that they desire at that time in their life to change their sexual orientation. But conversion therapy can also refer to practices that are imposed upon an individual by like family members. So a minor who's gay and their parents don't support their sexual orientation, they could be subjected to conversion therapy essentially against their will, right? So I just say all that because there's different permutations of what this looks like for people. But the Social Work Board, in regulating how social workers may practice in North Dakota, passed regulations that said this is not an ethical practice in North Dakota because there's well-established research that shows that conversion therapy is very harmful to the people who receive it. There was actually approval of that same decision by a legislative committee, which surprised a lot of people. So there was some really great advocacy by some Republican members of that board. And I think it was by a 7-6 vote that approval happened. So conversion therapy has been banned as an ethical practice in North Dakota. This bill is a reaction to that. Okay. So this bill is this current legislature that's meeting now trying to say, and you can see the definition there in subsection 1, I'll highlight it, but it defines conversion therapy, treatment with the goal of changing the sexual orientation or gender identity of an individual. So that definition would meet both of those scenarios I talked about, because the desire of the recipient of the therapeutic intervention, right? You see that doesn't factor in there anywhere. There's no language that refers to whether it's wanted or unwanted by the individual. And then it says the term includes medication, psychotherapy, electroshock therapy, and aversion therapy. And you can see there that by even referencing that, part of the way conversion therapy has been administered in the past has included things like electroshock therapy. And then essentially here's the meat and potatoes, subsection 2. It is an ethical violation. It is an ethical violation for a licensee to conduct conversion therapy. However, it is not an ethical violation for a licensed clinical social worker to counsel an individual who is questioning their sexuality or gender and wants to align their sexuality or gender with the individual's personal or spiritual beliefs. So this is just a lot of wordplay where it's like, this isn't conversion therapy is unethical, but here's what's not conversion therapy, right? So does that make sense? Like, it's kind of trying to redefine the term in a way that doesn't actually make any sense, but that's how they're this is part of the amendment process, right? It's like things that they're trying to do to worm their way through doing what they want to do and responding to criticism that they've heard on the original language. As a condition of engaging in the practices or treatment under this section, they shall in turn ensure that the practice or treatment is alignment with the individual's self-determination. They shall disclose to the individual being treated the nature of the treatment. They shall have received authorization from the individual being treated or that individual's parent or guardian to engage in the practices or treatment. So that's the conversion therapy bill. And then this one, we have to change. So we have a previous House concurrent resolution on that list that we gave you that was one that was withdrawn. It was replaced by this. So where you see on that sheet, the one that was withdrawn, this is sort of the replacement. So you can find it on the sheet where it says Obergefell, but House concurrent resolution, unless everyone just absolutely shields their eyes and ears from local news, you've heard about this because this came up this past last couple of weeks, and a lot of people have reacted negatively to the fact that this passed. So this House concurrent resolution passed the House. So House concurrent resolution is basically a philosophical or policy statement. It does not actually put anything down in our code section. It does not change any laws, but it says we as a state believe this. And this resolution says we as a state believe that the US Supreme Court should overturn the case that granted marriage equality in America. So state of North Dakota believes that the US Supreme Court should basically remove constitutional protections for marriage equality. There's lots of other troubling justifications in this bill, which you can read through. But as Dalton mentioned earlier on that sheet that you have, all of these things are hyperlinked in the side. Once you get on that website, we'll update that. I think maybe we can send out something updated, Shay, if that works. But 3013 isn't on there, but you'll be able to click into all of these and read them for yourselves. So those are kind of some of the big LGBTQ plus priorities going forward for next session, or for the second half of session. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then just talk through a handful of other updates. And I'm going to do that quickly because we want to leave some time here for Q&A at the end. So if you're on the sheet that we linked to you, you can scroll through and see some of these things, but some other, I think, notable highlights are both in the reproductive rights area, both the attempt to redefine murder, assault, crimes like that to include fetuses from the point of fertilization, which is known as a personhood bill, failed. So that, and it was a really interesting dynamic because there was a lot of infighting within the religious groups. The Catholic Conference and the North Dakota Family Alliance, which is kind of known as the evangelical lobby at the legislature, both opposed the personhood bill because the effect of it would have been that if you have an abortion at any point, you can be charged with murder. That bill, as well as an attempt to amend the existing abortion law sorry, my lawyer brain is like qualifying 6 statements, which I'm not going to spare you from, but essentially it would have put into place a law that would have allowed abortions up to 15 weeks, but then beyond 15 weeks, anyone who needed abortion care would have been subjected to like a review panel of other doctors, like 3 other doctors would have to look at the treatment plan other than your doctor and approve it. That bill also failed. And there's lots to unpack there, which I'm not going to because it failed. So those were 2 major positive things in the reproductive health space. 2 negative things in the reproductive health space were that Rep. Carla Rose Hansen submitted 2 resolutions that would have protected access to IVF and contraception. And then there was another bill that would have covered IVF services under state insurance. Those all failed as well. A few other really positive failures of the legislature so far. A bill that would have required the 10 commandments to be posted in all schools failed. A bill that would have required kind of that they're called blue laws, that would have reenacted laws that would have limited businesses from being able to operate before noon on Sundays in kind of religious observation. That failed as well. There was a bill that would have made hate speech a protected form of speech. So basically said you can't call anything hate speech. We can say whatever we want. That failed. Just going through the list here, seeing what else I want to highlight. A big disappointment this session that has been a coordinated effort of support amongst a bunch of different organizations, and again has been in the news, was the attempt to have North Dakota provide school meals. And I don't like calling it free because it's like we pay taxes, those pay for the bills. So we're using our tax money to pay for the meals. So it's a very popular policy amongst North Dakotans when polled about it, that school lunches should not cost people additional money beyond already their tax contributions. We talk about it as free school lunch. The legislature voted that down on the same day that they passed the anti-gay marriage resolution, which was an interesting, sort of strategic public messaging choice by the Republicans. But hey, do what you do. So so that was a really big disappointment because that's been a big area of work and focus. Another general area of focus that I would say isn't so much within our scope, only because a lot of other organizations work on it, is the issue of public school funding and vouchers. Those are ongoing discussions, but lots of policy is still alive that is seeking to redirect public funding into private schools. They've kind of finessed language across this conversation to try to obscure what it's doing, but that policy effort is alive and well. There was a bill that would have required local police officers to report people they suspect as being illegal immigrants and illegal, right, undocumented people. And I'm just using the language from the law, illegal immigrants. That did fail. And then a really interesting one, a resolution to urge North Dakotans to accept the kingship of Jesus Christ failed. Troublingly, 31 people voted in favor of that. And then there were actually another general area. There were a lot of good bills that would have sought to better protect renters' rights in North Dakota. A lot of those efforts have failed, unfortunately. Those include things like giving the labor commissioner more oversight of certain disputes, capping late fees, and limiting how rent payments that are outstanding can be sort of. There's ways that landlords can sort of advance or prioritize late fees over current fees, so it kind of keeps you perpetually late on your rent. A bill that would deal with that. There was a pretty crazy bill that would have required all high school students to lock up their phones every day. And it was like this huge, like $2 million appropriation because they would have had to buy like a little box for every student in North Dakota to put their phone in. That failed. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, another area that I think is of a lot of systemic concern, just for everybody to flag, is the very last one on the sheet, Senate Bill 2128. It's a bill that would require inmates to serve 85% of their sentence, and the effect of that would be to really tie the Department of Corrections hands in making assessments that someone is maybe ready for different supervision or housing options outside of maybe being in the prison. So for example, when kind of in the way it's talked about, they're talking about like halfway houses, right? Like places or organizations that allow people more freedom, the ability to maybe work or have just more freedom and start that transition out of being incarcerated. And so that did pass. But is a topic. It's an interesting thing to watch because the Attorney General and then the Director of DOCR and the corrections people are like really, really fighting about it. So that's the update. So I will pass it over to Dalton to kind of manage the next portion, but happy to answer any questions that people have or any clarifications that you all need on the information.
Thank you so much for that, Christina. And I know that we just threw a lot of information your way, but one of the big takeaways I want you to have is to recognize that so many of these bills started in the House. And so from today going on, this is your opportunity to contact your senators to defeat these bills. It's a lot less emails and a lot less phone calls you have to do because there are less senators than House members. But please get engaged, talk to your senators, talk to and email the people that are sitting on the committees that will be hearing these bills, especially the ones that relate to our LGBTQ plus community. And very much, I will emphasize HB 1144. I think that we really need to look at how devastating of a bill this is and how harmful it is for our school districts and for our youth. It is one of those things that we need to be raising our voices as much as we can about this. And if this worst case scenario does pass through the Senate as well, I want to also remind you all that we have one more shot at getting it defeated, and that's by asking your governor for a veto. So we have opportunities to defeat this horrible legislation, but it requires all of us using our collective voices and shouting that this is wrong and making sure that this doesn't become law. So without further ado, I wanted to open the floor for anyone that had any questions. So maybe we can answer those, or even if someone just has a comment of something that they want to raise. Sarah, I see you have your hand raised.
I do have to, first of all, Chrissy, as usual, I bow to all of you that do this. Yes, please put a smile on your face for a second and take that energy in. As you, BJ Armani Grand Forks page, anything that you need me to push, I will happily blast. What I do need to ask is this legislative list that you published, sending these through Messenger works really, really well. I don't, but if we put it on like Facebook and whatnot, sometimes it just gets like shadow banned. So I just wanted to give that little tidbit, but of course you always know that if I have an event going on, please again, hit me up. And Christina, just call me as you need for, if you just need to scream into the void. I mean it, like, thank you for all you do.
And you did raise a good point. So PDFs are more difficult to share, but they are handy because you can click the links on them. You can file save as PDFs as images. And so you can, if you want to share this on your like social media, that is a handy way of doing it. Alternatively, if you're on a Windows computer, you can click into the search bar and do snipping tool and be able to just drag over the highlighted areas that you want to save as an image. So these are a few different ways of getting it out there. We're also working on doing some graphic design and really pushing hard because this is our opportunity to get people there and defeat this. So again, I'll also remind we are looking at doing a lobby day. So keep your calendars flexible for March 10th through the 12th and show up with a bunch of us at the state capitol. So anyone else with any questions?
Stella had a question in the comments. Who determines how a specific word or topic is defined? Is there any evidence that is required to define something?
No. So who decides is a legislator that puts together language, goes to legislative council. This is this department of lawyers that helps a legislator who comes with an idea, put it in the form of all those bills I just reviewed with you. So they can define green as blue if they want. And then it gets so the process of determining whether or not that definition is what should be in our law is by the democratic process, by voting. So that committee hearing process that I mentioned, when people can show up and provide testimony, is kind of the first way, excuse me, the first way that once there's that bill, that you have an opportunity to show up and say, this is absurd and here's why. And subject matter experts almost always show up in those hearings and testify as to why these definitions are not sound, right? However, a lot of what happens in our legislature is driven by philosophy and desire to mandate or change other people's behavior. And so they kind of purposefully want to define things in a way that, with not the goal not being to be sort of an accurate definition, right? Because we all know, for example, the gender and sex definition, that there are multiple reasons why gender and sex are not the same thing. There's also multiple reasons why sex is not necessarily even a binary. The legislature for the last two sessions has more or less chose to ignore that and to say, so think about them defining terms as more of an effort to define public policy in this state than to be accurate, which keeps us on our toes.
There was one more I saw in the chat from Chris in regards to HCR 3013 and other bills. My senator has said he plans to vote no. I would imagine other senators have let their constituents know where they stand as well. Is there a way to find out who plans to vote yes or won't respond to their constituents and to put them on blast before the vote happens?
Yeah, so the first way we can all do that is to contact the people that are elected to represent us. So find out who your senators and representatives are, be in touch with them. To answer the second point, we are working on that. So we have a list. I want to shout out Rep. Boucher, who was very helpful yesterday in a meeting about kind of looking at that. So when you just so everyone on this call knows, when you're looking at sort of the nuts and bolts of how legislative advocacy or lobbying happens, there's people meeting all the time throughout session to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to sort of the way kind of the parlance is like to whip votes, to like try to bring people around and determine what their votes are going to be. I will tell you that on that resolution, I think there's cause for optimism that we can get it defeated in the Senate. So we're working on that. We're working on identifying who are definite yeses, definite nos, and then who is persuadable, and then working on that list. And so many of us are working on that. In terms of putting it on blast, I guess I'll tell you that in the process of doing the work that I just mentioned to you, I think communication and stuff happens to make targeted efforts at people who we think need to hear from more people. So we do that as sort of the situation calls for, but like immediately putting out a list of here's all the people who haven't confirmed they will not vote no on this yet, right? It's all kind of like like strategic things that we're trying to do over time and have a lot of one-on-one conversations. So in addition to sort of showing up at the committee hearings, providing information to committees, another big part of the work of people that are doing lobbying or legislative advocacy is to be up there every day, having conversations with people all the time. So that's really how we're keeping track of where people are falling on that vote and knowing what our numbers are, and then who we should talk to, and then communicating out legislative alerts. So Prairie Action, for example, is an organization in this state that does a lot of work getting what are called action alerts out to people to say, contact your representatives about this. And so be looking for those things and be responding to those things. And if possible, make a phone call. One of the things that we've seen this session, it's a new form of I don't have to listen to you, is, well, I think a lot of these are AI generated, or these are chatbots that are sending me these emails. So be thinking about, it is totally appropriate for you to reach out to your senator or representative and say, I would like to meet you in person. Are you going to be back in the district over the weekend? If not, I would like a phone call. And to actually make that sort of human to human connection, whether it's by phone or in person. So
you can also handwrite letters. And sometimes that has a extra special boost to it because people don't get handwritten letters anymore. And also they can't deny that you're a robot. So turns out you can't deny our humanness when we handwrite. So but yeah, please, especially if it's like you live in their district, use that because it shows that like, hey, you will lose my vote, I can work against you and I will get my friends to vote against you. Use that as leverage. And also very much try and cultivate relationships with your elected officials, so it is a like person to person relationship and not just a name on a screen that someone can easily dismiss, but it's like, you know, it suddenly becomes like a, no, I'm your neighbor three houses down. And it adds this personhood to it. And talking about our personal experiences, our friends and families that might be impacted by this. Christina, I see your hand raised. And then.
yeah, I just wanted to mention too something that people may not realize, which is when we're lobbying, you'll hear representatives or senators come up to the podium and say, this is a constituent bill. So people that develop relationship with their legislators, and a lot of times that's entities, right? Actually can ask them, I would like you to take up this particular policy issue because I think it's important and I am in your district. So, and Kylie may be able to speak to this, but there's that level of, if you're working with and getting to know your elected representatives, people actually are able to have them say, I've been approached by 3 or 4 constituents that have raised this issue, so I have decided to introduce legislation on it. So that's one of the other really valuable things about cultivating those relationships outside of when the session's actually meeting, is that if they know you and you're talking with them, they are your representative in the government and they can carry forward policy positions that you tell them are important to you. Kylie, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Christina. And yes, to answer your point, legislators are supposed to be responsive. You build a relationship with them, they bring these pieces of legislation forward. I will say I have seen very negative reactions from a lot of Republicans this year. I think they're getting more pushback than they're used to, which is great. They're not used to the level of feedback that they're seeing, and it makes them uncomfortable and angry. Even my own senator, who is usually pretty agreeable here in District 41, he's been very salty in his responses. But I wanted to share an opportunity too. We had, I had just, in a group that I'm in, I had shared an option for people who might be interested in signing a public letter of support that'll be shaped as a letter to the editor in support of the LGBTQ plus community after HCR 3013 was passed. I'm going to share a link to that in the comments if anybody would like to sign. I have to do a little bit of regrouping because so far we have about 650 people who have signed this. So that makes it really hard for it to be a typical letter to the editor. Obviously, I think we're going to have to pay for an ad, which many people have offered to help pay for that. So we're going to figure out some way to do that, at least in the larger newspapers, and then share it in another way in some of the smaller newspapers as well. So I'm going to post that link in the comments. The only thing I ask is that you don't post the link publicly anywhere. You can share it directly, but we're trying to avoid trolls and unwanted people on that just taking advantage of the form. So I'll share that in the comments and in the chat and happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie.
Yeah.
That's a really great example. And I'm sure everyone on this call knows, but Kylie was an elected official in North Dakota and been involved in a lot of great work. And this is a really good example of grassroots advocacy, right? Someone working to say, hey, you know what, I'll step forward and organize an effort to get information into our news, you know, our newspapers and things like that to show public support for this. So
Yeah. And so are there any other final questions that we can potentially answer? Seeing none, I'm going to shout out an action that you can take today, other than just contacting your legislators, is there is a readout happening in front of like all the public libraries pretty much in the state this afternoon at 2 to 3 p.m., 2 to 2:30 p.m. So grab that book you've been meaning to read and go silently read in front of your library to support the right to read and fight against people banning books and banning this wonderful thing that is known as a library. So please support that and always stay in touch with us. Follow the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition on Facebook, Instagram, get onto our newsletters, or just simply reach out to me in any sort of way. I'll again drop my email in the chat for those that you just want to email me. Even if you have a quote unquote stupid question, I'm more than willing to help answer that and connect you to any sort of organization, as this is complex work, but it's also simple work. It's simply being a good human and connecting with others. So thank you so much for all attending today. Get together with your friends and take some actions as we move forward to protect human rights in our state and our country during these trying times. So